It's the week ending Saturday the 12th of October, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Turkey launching a military operation in northern Syria, diplomatic immunity in the spotlight following the death of teenager Harry Dunn, and Colleen Rooney accusing Rebecca Vardy of leaking details of her personal life to a tabloid. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team, we have Tait and Gabriel Power. And from our US sister site, theweek.com, it's Jessica Hullinger. And starting the show this week is Cameron. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The dope new trend that's taking over Silicon Valley.
Simon Sinek famously says, if you wake up in the morning and you're checking your phone before you're saying hello to your spouse, that's an addictive behavior, and it's dopamine that is driving that addiction. So what happens with social media is Robert Sapolsky, who did the foundational research on this at Stanford, calls it the magic of maybe. When you look at your phone and maybe there's a text there and maybe there's not, and you don't know, when it shows up, that high you get, that's dopamine. It's the magic of maybe. Maybe it'll be there, maybe it won't. When it shows up, you get a 400% spike in dopamine.
Stephen Kotler on the Big Think channel. The video is called How We Chase Dopamine, Porn, Social Media, and Alcohol. These are a few of my favourite things. Cameron, why is this in the news? Dopamine.
There's a psychiatry professor in San Francisco called Dr. Cameron Saper, and he's basically come up with this new way of helping his clients, who he says are mainly executives from Silicon Valley, to help alleviate stress and improve productivity. And his way of going about it is to do something called dopamine fasting, which is essentially to avoid anything that could release excessive amounts of dopamine.
So this goes beyond just not checking your Facebook whilst you're in a queue at Starbucks. This goes into not gambling, not looking at porn, not even engaging in conversations where your adrenaline might be increased.
Yeah, there's actually quite a funny example on Twitter of someone who said they actually left a conversation halfway through because they felt their dopamine levels getting too high, which is quite obscure. So the idea is to cut out anything in your life for a period of time, whether it's an hour to 4 hours. You're essentially not doing anything that'll make you happy or that will get you excited. So among those are taking drugs. If you smoke weed, then obviously your dopamine levels are going to go up. But it also includes things like comfort eating or watching pornography.
Comfort eating. Just briefly before we move on, talk us through what that means in this concept. Because it's not just about pizza and cake. It's about receptors in your brain and particular kinds of food.
It's not just foods that taste good, like your pizzas or anything. It's actually to do with carbohydrates. So it's anything that's got a mix of fats or carbohydrates in, like buttered popcorn or pasta or cheese. That can actually send your dopamine levels through the roof. So it's best to avoid them.
Jessica, does this make sense to you? I mean, we're in a fast-paced world. I understand the thing about slowing down a bit. But I mean, let's say you read a book rather than check your emails. You're still getting pleasure from reading a book like people used to in the old days. Surely there's still a dopamine release when you turn each page.
Right. I mean, I think that some people are maybe taking this a little bit too far. Really what this is about is just being sensible with indulging in pleasure, right? And that's not something that's new. That's something that we've done for centuries. I mean, so many religions are based on sort of denying oneself the things that feel good, taste good, look good, in the pursuit of sort of spirituality. And of course, in classic Silicon Valley form, someone has taken this and given it a new spin and called it a trend, which I think is a bit silly. And actually, if you look up this guy, I'm sure he's very well qualified and respected, but I did a little bit of digging sort of on his LinkedIn page, and he's promoting himself as the inventor of this new Silicon Valley trend, and it feels a little bit like somebody looking for a book deal to me. We just have to be sensible about the way that we indulge, and yes, I think we are bombarded particularly by technology at the moment, but I don't think we should punish ourselves for doing things we enjoy.
But the fact that this is happening in Silicon Valley is significant, isn't it, Cameron? The fact is that the people who are visiting this guy, he's not just created a kind of godless Sabbath. He has created a structure in which they might look at their day jobs differently. You know, his clients are the people who spend their days creating apps that reward us with dopamine hits.
Absolutely. It's a great point because it's almost like you're targeting a problem right from its very core. So just to kind of summarize what would give us a dopamine hit from apps or anything like that. Let's say if you're on your phone and you just get a notification come through, or it's that little red dot with a number that comes up above an app, that can give us a dopamine hit because it's making us want to see what's there. The best way of describing it is the magic of maybe, which is how Kotler put it in the video that we heard at the beginning of this piece. So what an app developer could do is they could look at that and they would go, well, we need to tell people some way of doing it. How are we going to change that? Because if you look at it, it's a very, very small thing. Just having a little red number that comes up can basically make us become addicted to our smartphones. But what I found quite interesting is there was another story that came out quite recently of a teenager who said he was addicted to gaming, and he didn't necessarily blame it on the games, but he did say that they're done in a way that just keeps people engaged, and you constantly want to keep going back and finding out what more you can do. And it's almost a little bit of a human behavior that we need to regulate ourselves. We can't just expect others to regulate it for us.
It depends where you feel the blame for that sort of thing lies, because the NHS has launched a program this week to help youngsters fighting gaming addiction, which indicates that they are willing to view it as a mental health problem. So perhaps there is a lot of credence to be lent to the idea that dopamine hits from apps and games and things like that are a genuine harm. However, I feel like the fasting that these Silicon Valley types are promoting is a bit too much. We're getting a lot of people saying like, oh, don't eat anything. You can only drink water and you can't talk to anybody. Then they also, at the same time, promote things like exercise and meditation as a form of self-help while you're doing it, which are two activities that release dopamine. So
I think that we have to be careful because actually the guy, Dr. Sepa, he is not recommending that you do, quote, dopamine fasting, for a week or for a full day even, or that you don't do anything that you enjoy. I think that that's Silicon Valley sort of taking it to the extreme. What he's saying is, like I said, let's be sensible. Let's not look at our phone for an evening. Set realistic parameters for yourself that allow you to take a step away because you're right. These things are addictive, and it is second nature to look at our phones at every second, especially if you do work on your phone. It is addictive, and so I think that it's making the conscious decision to say, I'm going to put that away now and spend time doing something else. I think what I find troubling about this is the sort of branding around it.
And I think particularly in the world that we live in today, we're almost required to constantly be on our phones. And there's, my commitments, there is always a reason to be on my phone every day. So apparently the average American spends 11 hours looking at media and scrolling through their phone and through their computer every day.
Every day?
Every day. 11 hours.
That's the vast majority of their waking hours.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
I'd say we're constantly hooked. So, it's actually a very healthy lifestyle that Dr. Sepa is promoting because it isn't, he's not saying you have to go and cut everything out for such a long period of time. It's just, he recommends starting off with an hour. Maybe you just don't look at your phone for an hour, don't look at your computer for an hour. And then maybe if you want to, you can up it up to 4 hours.
The thing about calling it dopamine fasting, though, is you might end up, especially in that kind of Silicon Valley bro culture of kind of macho biohacking, there's the possibility of creating a new anxiety, which is you haven't fasted enough dopamine that week. It becomes a competition. They'll probably invent a new piece of technology that will monitor how much dopamine you've got.
Sending your stress levels through the roof.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I found when I did some research on this is that Dr. Sepa, as you say, only advocated for like an hour or so, or, like generally healthy living. But if you look up blogs of people who do it or YouTube videos, you get a lot of people who say, I dopamine fasted for 24 hours and I reached a higher level of brain function, and it's amazing how much time we waste on these meaningless addictions. And it's like, go away.
Jessica, have you made any changes in your life recently that you think might qualify as dopamine fasting, even if you wouldn't give it that label?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have actually fairly recently. Yeah, I've been meditating once a day, usually in the morning. And it's after my kid has gone to nursery and the house is quiet and I have just a few minutes.
And whilst the USA is still asleep, crucially for your job.
Exactly. While America's asleep, the Trump news hasn't started rolling in just yet. And I've actually found it just quite grounding. I haven't had any huge sort of spiritual revelations, but I do find it to be calming and relaxing, and just taking a moment to be aware of your surroundings can really set your day on a good path. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call that dopamine fasting. I would call that just centering a bit. I think the message of this is quite good. I think we just have to be careful about how we deliver it.
Cameron, have you done anything that could qualify as dopamine fasting?
No, Ollie, and actually, when looking at this, I realised that I'm probably quite a terrible person when it comes to all of it, because I spend pretty much all my day on my phone or my computer, or watching stuff or listening to podcasts, particularly the Week Unwrapped.
Yeah, huge adrenaline rush people get listening to this show. Gabriel?
I also meditate.
Yeah.
Occasionally. Not as much as I probably should. But yeah. But what does that count as dopamine fasting?
Well, I don't know.
though?
Did you do it in response to feeling overwhelmed by modern life?
I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Well, then, yes, it does
It's kind
a
of
bit.
like a byproduct, but,
I mean, because something that I've done this year, because I was aware that I'm so addicted to all this stuff, but I just thought I could make a small change, is, I mean, it sounds really silly, but I've just relegated my Gmail app, my Twitter app, and my Facebook app to page 5 of my phone apps, which just means, so silly, but it just means that instinctive thing of filling every second of dead time with your thumb. I have to scroll 5 times to get there, which means I'm more likely to open up a news app or my photos and not interact with something.
Do you not have a feeling all the time of like, oh my God, I'm really far behind? This is why I'm so stressed. But I mean, do you never have this feeling of I'm completely out of date now?
No, and you realise the more you abstain from it, the more productive it feels. I try and spend a whole day not looking at apps if I can. But I wouldn't call it dopamine fasting. I'd call it spending time with my family. But I try when I'm out with my family not to look at my email. Because I think, well, I can't deal with those things anyway at this point. It's just going to fill my head with a load of crap I can't deal with.
Maybe I just need help.
Maybe your story of the week has been a cry for help. Jessica, it's your turn after this. Okay, Jessica, your turn. What do you think is the underreported story of the week just gone?
This is the week we took the humans out of human resources.
Hello, my name is Vera, and I'm a robot. And what's your name?
Hi, my name is Jason Bellini. This is Vera, a robot that does job interviews.
What are the 3 top important tips for a salesperson?
She's done 10,000 of them and counting.
Congratulations. We chose you as one of the best candidates for a sales representative.
What looks like the future is already a reality.
Not Black Mirror, but in fact a video from the Wall Street Journal's YouTube channel. Jessica, what's the story?
So this week, Singapore's largest bank, DBS, revealed that it had been using an AI program to screen applicants for wealth management jobs. And that over the last year or so, the program, which is named JIM, short for Job Intelligence Maestro, has made the process of hiring better and faster, finding more qualified candidates in a less amount of time than a normal human recruiter would.
So this isn't just a press release. They are doing this.
Oh, yeah. No,
all the new employees in this bank in Singapore have been screened by AI.
I don't know about all. I'm not entirely sure how widespread it is within the bank itself, but they've been using this for a year to screen lots and lots of potential employees. This matters because it's happening sort of on a global scale. It's not just this one bank. PricewaterhouseCoopers found that 40% of companies it surveyed are using AI to help screen and hire new workers. So this is just the beginning of something that is going to be happening on quite a wide scale. Of course, it raises the question of, like, do we want robots to be making our hiring decisions for us?
Okay. Do we want robots to be making our hiring decisions for us?
So I think there are pros and cons to this. I mean, the way that it's pitched by the companies who are making these programs is that it can weed out bias in hiring, right? So we humans have built-in internal biases that make us want to hire or not hire people based on various things like how they look, how they sound, where they come from, all of which can negatively influence the working population that we have in our offices and in our companies. And so the idea being that if we take the human aspect out of hiring, that the computer would help us sort of even out the working population. So that's one potential way of looking at it. The downside to that, of course, is that as we have seen in various studies and as AI has been rolled out, AI is only as smart and as unbiased as the people who program it, right? So, and if you base these programs on data that is already existing, so like let's say you tell the computer, please only hire people who are going to be successful in this role. Well, how do you define success? Is it by looking at the people in your office who are already hired and have been successful in that role? If so, then what do all those people look like? Are they all well-educated, white, dudes? And if so, then that's what the computer is going to recruit for. If it were perfect, it seems like it could solve a lot of problems. But of course, AI is not perfect.
Cameron.
It's interesting you say that because in 2014, Amazon developed a similar system for their hiring process. And basically, they used an AI to sift through all of the CVs that came through. And they would pick out, I think it was the top 10%. And those are the people that they would go and interview in real life, which sounds really good. You know, it kind of basically slims down the whole process, especially if you get up to 1,000 CVs that come through. You're saving precious time. However, it was actually sexist because what happened is they, as you said, Jess, you have to feed information to the AI for it to learn what the ideal candidate looks like, whether that's kind of one of your existing employees or CVs that you've got through that were really good, but maybe you didn't hire them. However, the CVs that they fed to the AI were predominantly male. So any CV that came up that said, had the word woman in it, or I was part of a women's chess club or women's rugby club, they immediately put to one side and said that's not part of the ideal candidate because it doesn't match with any of the ideal candidates that we already had.
Okay, but these are teething problems, aren't they? You know, we're talking about this in terms of future gazing. And Gabriel, if these things are ironed out, if the data set becomes larger by definition because more companies start using it, so those issues of racial profiling and backgrounds aren't necessarily so problematic, could this be the future?
Well, the question would be, is there a way to escape the kind of cycle of prejudice within the field? So like if you are using algorithms, even if you use massive machine learning data sets and all that kind of stuff, the machine will learn from data sets that feed into themselves when it comes to people of success being, white or male or anything like that.
But if the data sets were large enough and were broad enough, is what I'm saying, actually doesn't it nullify some of the prejudices that humans bring? You know, we're talking as if humans don't exhibit biases when they're hiring people.
Absolutely. In an ideal world, if you manage to get the machine to weed out prejudices that humans have, then it should work. However, it does also rely on machines being able to accurately interpret things such as brow furrowing and chin raising and smiling and lip tightening and the tone of their voice and things like that. And maybe I'm being something of a Luddite, but I feel like I would struggle to trust a computer to get those things dead right, exactly right. And also there are parts of society, say the more privileged parts of society, people who go to private school or whatever, who might be taught certain mannerisms or ways of speaking or ways of acting that would help them kind of beat the computer. And you don't really want that to be the idea, the goal of a job interview.
But that exists now. People who have that kind of background are more likely to come across as kind of, affable and answering the question and charming and all those things people say about people that aren't really to do with their experience than people who haven't.
That is absolutely true. But then what's the point in the computer? Where would be the benefit?
I think that something that I find troubling about all of this is that I don't think you can discount the human aspect of hiring, right? In a lot of fields where your job is based on the relationships you have with your coworkers, you want to know that the person you're hiring is likable, is friendly, that you get along with them, that they're going to be cooperative in meetings and projects, and that is incredibly important, and I don't know that I would trust a robot to make those decisions. There's a lot to be said for a hunch that you get, a gut feeling that you get in a meeting, and a robot isn't going to be great at gut feelings. A robot wants to eliminate the gut feelings, right? So I think that if this is going to go forward, which I'm sure it is, there will have to be a human element that remains in the process. So maybe if you can combine the best of both the human and the robot in making these hiring decisions, it could improve the entire process.
And that goes for the prospective employee too, doesn't it? I mean, when you go to a job interview, you are looking at the company and thinking, do I want to work here? And that's based largely on who am I going to be working with and will I get on with them?
Could you imagine sending your CV into a job and then a week later you get an email that comes through and goes, congratulations, you've got the job and you start this day and you've got no idea who your boss is going to be like, what the company atmosphere is going to be like. So I think that's a relatively extreme example, and I think that's a little bit kind of like an Orwellian view that I can't see happening for many, many years, if at all. It would go down the route of kind of having a hybrid between the two. There are people that apply for jobs, just in droves, and there's got to be loads of rubbish people, like properly rubbish, spelling mistakes on their CVs that are 8 pages long. And the idea for the AI is just to kind of like push a lot of them out. And they might be lovely people in real life, and they might be great for the role in real life. But a CV is also a way of finding out whether someone has the skills to really kind of, do they care about themselves? Do they care about presenting themselves?
Well, except it's a way of finding out if that person, to use the business jargon, fits inside the box, isn't it? So whereas the example you're giving there of someone with spelling mistakes on their CV, if you're dyslexic, obviously you shouldn't be submitting a CV with spelling mistakes on it, but it might be that you'd get to the next stage and clearly be the best candidate. It's just that your written work doesn't really illustrate that. It depends on the role whether that's suitable or not, doesn't it?
But the other thing as well is that, yes, that's the case, but a lot of these technologies, they're not developed by one they're not developed by lots of different companies. It's usually one big company that is then lots of other companies go and license it. So it depends on perhaps if there's bias that comes from the actual maker itself. But if you think about it, you could have a hiring manager that is extremely tired when they look at your CV and they go, I don't really like the color that they've used on that. Screw him. Whereas an AI might give you that opportunity.
Actually, talking about the fact that there is only really one company doing this at the moment, or a few select companies, if we're really sort of processing this down the line and thinking about how scary this might be, what about the AI being linked, Jessica? Is that part of this story? So if you've been rejected from one job interview, but the IP that analysed your CV is owned by the same company that is analysing it when you submit it for another job interview, do all of those rejections become collated? You know, do you leave a digital footprint, a reputational score?
Yeah, that's a little bit spooky, isn't it? I mean, it's not inconceivable, is it? It's very, very possible. And I think that we need to also be honest about what the motivations of the companies using these programs are. They tout it as a way to remove bias, but I think Cam's exactly right. A lot of it is about increasing the speed at which they can wade through the resumes and get people on board. And if that is their main motivation, is to fill the roles as quickly as possible, I think that could lead to a lot of potential problems and a lot of issues being overlooked.
Okay, Gabriel, you're up next after this. And so, finally this week, it's Gabriel. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
When it comes to older people streaming music, it's only rock and roll, but they like it.
Older adults, they tended to prefer unpretentious and sophisticated music. This is simply because as we age and when we're older, we do tend to listen to the music that speaks to our own experiences.
Dr. Ariel Bonville-Roussi speaking to Genius News on YouTube last year. Gabriel, what's been going on this week?
Well, music streaming service Deezer this week, using a survey of 1,000 British music listeners, have found that people stop discovering new music at around the age of 30. Meaning that older people...
That's damning, isn't it?
Older people may not simply be being curmudgeonly when they say they hate all new music or words to that effect. From a scientific perspective, this backs up previous studies which suggest that musical tastes are based heavily on music we discovered in our teenage years and early 20s. The most important period for forming music tastes is usually around 14 for men and 13 for women.
So... that accounts for why fewer older people seem to be the kind of people who are intent on discovering new music, and most people keep harking back to the stuff they've been listening to forever.
Absolutely. So if you look at people who stop discovering music at around the age of 30, it turns out that although we form our tastes when we're like 13, 14, the peak age for discovering new music, there's a huge peak at the age of about 24, when we just constantly are finding new artists and rushing through Spotify to find all these new bands and solo artists.
Or our price, in my case, when I was 13. Spotify was not a thing.
Yes.
Jessica, I wonder whether younger people are music fans and then they lose that fandom as they get older, get less interested, and so hark back to what they discovered the first time around and got really into. Or whether it's hormones, basically. Like when you're a teenager, you're looking for creative expressions of your inner feelings that channels itself into music. But it's the case that throughout your whole life, there's only a minority of people that are such fans of music that they keep seeking out new things. And that was always the minority. It was the case when you were a teenager too.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I mean, as a teenager, you are constantly looking for new experiences. You have an insatiable appetite for stimulation. And so, yeah, I think that there's probably something to that. I think it could also just be that, like, as you get older, you run out of time to look for new music. I mean, I have hardly the time to spend on seeking out new artists, trying to find the gem in the long list of new Spotify releases. I just don't have the time for it. But I also think that research has shown that exposure matters, right? So I was actually speaking to my mom about this last night, and she runs an art studio, and she was saying that she really likes the new releases because a lot of the people who work in her studio are younger, and they have the radio on, they're listening to the top 40 hits or whatever, and she's like, I love the new Taylor Swift and blah, blah, blah. So, the more you listen to something, the more that you will like it. And so there's something to that. If you're not listening to the radio, if you're listening to more, Radio 4, talk radio, whatever, if you're not listening to the new music, you're less likely to be exposed to it and therefore less likely to enjoy it.
Does that ring true for you as well, Cameron, that it's about exposure?
100%. But what I find quite interesting in this sense is I think it could change quite dramatically, bearing in mind that we're in such a... music is just so accessible now. If you go back 30 or 40 odd years, the way that you would find the best new music was probably to listen to Radio 1 or Pirate Radio, and it was kind of like, this is the brand new hit, and it would be played every 5 minutes for X many weeks. Whereas now we can just go and jump on YouTube, we can go and jump on Spotify, you can just go onto a randomized playlist, and there are so many different types of radio stations where you can go and get new music that is even tailored to your taste of music. We don't have the time to really go and delve into new music, but discovery is completely different now. It's far more passive. A lot of people find new music through TV shows, for instance. I could see the statistics changing quite radically kind of within the next 10 years or so.
And there's a piece about this on Quartzy as well, a psychologist writing about the science of why, perhaps as you get older, you're less interested in new music.
Yes. So while Cam's point makes sense in that maybe over time this rule will break free of this rule, there was a 2001 study which suggested that our favorite songs stimulate pleasure responses in the brain, releasing dopamine, there you go, serotonin, oxytocin, and other happy chemicals, in inverted commas. And while this does happen for everyone, during our adolescent years, our brains are going through a lot of changes, and we become very hormonal and sensitive. So if we hear a song we really love, it's more likely to stay with us forever at that age. So there is an argument for saying that over time, this may change, this shift, but there is also science that suggests that it might not.
So I think that that's all very interesting, but I tried to Google this earlier, and Google literally filled in the blanks for me when I tried to Google has music, and it was like gotten worse. And I was like, yes, that is what I meant, Google. Thank you for asking.
Is Google used by old people?
And actually, so there's research about this. So a study from 2012 analyzed 500,000 songs, and they found that songs released since 1955 are becoming more homogenous, meaning that pop music sounds the same. Songs sound similar these days. And so, when older people say, I don't understand this song is different from the one I just heard. It sounds exactly like the one that was on 5 minutes ago. Why do they all sound the same? There is science to that. I don't know exactly why all the music sounds the same. Maybe it's just wanting to repeat the success of a hit, and so they copy the format of the song. But the other thing that this study found was that music is getting louder. So it's getting louder by about 1 decibel every 8 years. So if your ears are becoming more sensitive or you don't like loud music or loud noises, like that's a real thing, that it is becoming louder.
Fact I learned from the Switched On Pop podcast as well is that more songs than ever now start with the chorus. And that is because of music streaming services, because you get cash for every play. So you want to hook people in.
That's so interesting.
As long as possible. Yeah.
Maybe music streaming is to blame.
So yeah, the 2012 study used a thing called the Million Song Dataset, which mainly looked at mainstream music, and that's the big difference. So modern music might be getting more homogenous or using the same chord structures or having an excessive amount of compression applied to it, but that is all about mainstream music. Music is more diverse now than ever. So when people are saying that music in the 50s and 60s was more, they had a higher dynamic range or had less compression or was more interesting, that's just from a top 40 perspective. You can go out now and get the craziest experimental music like that, like on Spotify or anywhere like that.
And yet, would you care to name the number one album in the US and the UK at the moment as we record?
It is Abbey Road by the Beatles from 1969.
Yeah. What does that tell us then? Does that tell us that that's older people rediscovering the Beatles because of the anniversaries, so they never have changed their taste? Or is that younger people discovering the Beatles because actually they're more open to new music? I don't even know what that means.
Well, the fact that charts now take into account streaming services such as Spotify and Deezer and YouTube indicates that it's probably a mixture of the two, because it's not like people are going out, it hasn't gotten to number one from people going out and buying vinyl copies of it. It must be younger people, which I guess means that the Beatles are just kind of special.
I can say that my 3.5-year-old son's favourite song ever is Octopus's Garden.
That's a tune.
So that his streams alone probably count for at least a sale.
Well, I mean, it's an album that really does span so many generations, and obviously the Beatles are an exception in this case because they're almost considered to be basically they are the originators of popular culture, really, if you just ignore the 1950s.
Love to end with a bold statement. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they really did invent pop music as we know it today.
You are so backloading this show.
No, I'm going to stick with it. Its importance covers so many generations. It's still people who, maybe who have listened to it in the first place and they've gone out to go and buy the CD version, but then you've also got loads of people that will be listening to it on streaming services as well.
And on the contentious thought that John, Paul, George and Ringo may have invented the 21st century as we know it, that is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Cameron Tait and Gabriel Power and Jessica Hullinger. For more excellent audio with mass appeal to young and old, check out the Week Unwrapped's back catalogue via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get yours. Just search The Week Unwrapped. And don't forget to subscribe. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sarah Miles at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again in an octopus's garden to unwrap next week, bye-bye.